The silence of Xylo Station had a weight to it that Cale had grown accustomed to over the years. The metallic corridors, the distant hum of mining equipment, the occasional creaking of the station as it adjusted to the extreme temperature variations on the barren planetoid surface. These sounds had become as familiar to him as his own heartbeat. At 47, Cale had spent nearly a decade at this remote outpost on the far reaches of the Kuiper Belt extension, maintaining machinery and watching the stars through reinforced viewports when his shift ended. Most technicians lasted 6 months before the isolation drove them back to the inner planets. Cale had found an unusual peace in the solitude. Here, among the machines, he didn't have to explain himself or pretend to be something he wasn't. The corporation sent supplies every 3 months. New workers occasionally cycled through, but Cale remained, a constant like the distant sun that appeared as little more than a bright star from this far corner of the solar system. Tonight, like most nights, he sat at his workstation, a cup of synthetic coffee cooling beside him as he logged maintenance reports. The station housed only 5 people currently. Himself, 2 miners named Jarvik and Torres who kept to themselves, a communications specialist named Reeves who would be leaving in 2 weeks, and a logistics officer who had arrived last month, and whose name Cale couldn't quite remember. That was how he preferred it. Minimal human interaction, maximum efficiency. The alarm shattered the silence so abruptly that Cale knocked over his coffee. The liquid splashed across his console as a red warning flashed on his screen. Proximity alert from the perimeter sensors. His first thought was space debris, a common enough occurrence as fragments from the asteroid belt occasionally made their way out this far. His second thought was equipment malfunction, also common in the harsh conditions of Xylos. Computer, display alert details, he said, mopping up the spilled coffee with a rag. Unidentified object has impacted on the southern quadrant of Xylos. Mass estimate suggests artificial construction rather than natural debris. No communication signals detected. Cale frowned. Unscheduled arrivals were rare, and the lack of communication signals was concerning. Corporate protocol was clear. Report any anomalies immediately to Central Command. But curiosity got the better of him. He pulled on his thermal suit and grabbed an emergency kit. Computer, log that I'm performing routine external maintenance. I'll check the anomaly while I'm out there. Acknowledged. Exercise caution, Maintenance Chief Cale. The airlock cycled, and moments later, Cale was driving the small rover across the rocky surface of Xylos. The planetoid's reduced gravity made the vehicle bounce slightly as it navigated around craters and mineral formations. The station's lights diminished behind him as he followed the coordinates displayed on his helmet's heads-up display. It took him nearly 40 minutes to reach the site. What he found made him brake the rover sharply, sending a plume of dust into the airless space around him. Not debris, not a malfunction. A ship, small, perhaps only large enough for 1 or 2 occupants. Its design unlike anything in the corporate fleet or any Earth vessels he'd encountered. Its hull bore scorch marks and what appeared to be impact damage. It had crashed rather than landed, leaving a furrow of disturbed regolith behind it. Cale approached cautiously, his heart hammering. This was first contact protocol territory, something he'd been trained for, but never expected to encounter on a backwater mining outpost. "Hello," he transmitted on an open frequency, knowing full well that if the craft was of alien origin, there was little chance his communication would be understood. "This is Maintenance Chief Cale of Xylos Station. Do you require assistance?" Silence. He circled the vessel, looking for signs of life or movement. A portion of the hull had been breached, revealing what must be the interior. Taking a deep breath, Cale activated his suit's external lights and leaned in to peer through the opening. The interior was dimly lit by faint emergency lighting. Controls and panels, unlike any he recognized, lined what must be the cockpit. But what seized his attention was the figure slumped in what appeared to be the pilot's chair. Humanoid, but definitely not human. Even in the low light, he could see that the being's skin had a faint luminescence, a pale blue-violet that seemed to pulse weakly. The proportions were similar to a human. 2 arms, 2 legs, a torso, and a head, but more slender, more graceful somehow. The face, turned slightly toward him, had features that were almost elfin. Large, almond-shaped eyes now closed, a small nose, and delicate lips. A silvery substance that might have been blood was crusted around a gash on her forehead. She was clearly unconscious, perhaps severely injured. Kale's training kicked in automatically. Check for signs of life, assess injuries, stabilize, transport to medical facilities. But corporate protocol also kicked in. Any contact with non-human intelligent life forms must be immediately reported. The entity must be quarantined until corporate specialists arrive. No unauthorized interaction permitted. Kale hesitated only briefly. The being before him was injured, possibly dying. Whatever she was, wherever she had come from, she needed help now, not after days of corporate deliberation. With careful movements, he widened the breach in the hull enough to extract her. She was lighter than he expected, even accounting for Xylos's low gravity. Her body felt fragile in his arms, and up close, he could see that her clothing, a torn bodysuit of some iridescent material, was stained with a silvery fluid in several places. She was breathing, but shallowly, and her skin's luminescence flickered erratically. Back at the rover, he secured her as gently as possible and covered her with an emergency thermal blanket. Protocol be damned. He couldn't leave her to die alone in that wreckage. The journey back to the station seemed interminable. Kale's mind raced through scenarios, none of them good. If he reported this, the corporation would lock down the station, quarantine everyone, and likely treat the alien as a specimen rather than a patient. If he didn't report it, he was violating at least 6 different regulations, any one of which could result in his termination and possible prosecution. By the time he reached the station, he had made his decision. He'd used the service entrance to his private quarters, a privilege of his long tenure and senior status. He would tend to her injuries first, then figure out what to do next. Getting her inside without being noticed was tense, but successful. The night shift was minimal, and the service corridors were rarely used by anyone but him. Once safely in his quarters, he laid her gently on his bed and removed his helmet, taking his first breath of the same air as this being from another world. His medical knowledge was basic, first aid and emergency response required for all station personnel, but it would have to do. The scanner from the emergency kit provided limited information. Her physiology was similar enough to human that it could detect life signs, but different enough that many readings came back as errors or unknowns. He cleaned her wounds with antiseptic, noting that her blood, while silvery, seemed to behave much like human blood, clotting at the edges of her injuries. He applied synthetic skin to the worst cuts and set up an oxygen supplement near her face, unsure if it would help, but unwilling to risk doing nothing. As he worked, he noted other details about her. Her hair, if that's what it was, seemed to be made of fine, fiber-like strands that changed color slightly, from silver to pale blue, as they caught the light. Her skin, besides its faint glow, had a texture like smooth porcelain, with barely visible patterns that reminded him of circuit pathways. Her fingers were long and tapered, ending in nails that looked more like delicate scales. When he had done all he could for her injuries, Kale sat back in a chair opposite the bed, suddenly aware of the enormity of what he had done. He had an alien life form in his quarters. He had broken quarantine protocols. He had hidden critical information from the corporation. And he had no idea what would happen when, if, she woke up. For 3 days, Kale maintained his routine while caring for his secret guest. He reported for his shifts, conducted maintenance, took meals in the common area occasionally to avoid suspicion. He fabricated a story about a personal project to explain his increased time in his quarters. The alien, he had started thinking of her as she rather than remained unconscious but stable. Her vital signs, as far as he could interpret them, seemed to be improving. The luminescence of her skin had grown more consistent, which he took as a good sign. On the 4th day, while Kale was checking her wounds, her eyes flew open. They were unlike any eyes he had seen. Large, with irises that shifted colors like oil on water, currently a deep violet streaked with gold. They fixed on him with an intensity that made him freeze in place. In an instant, she had scrambled backwards against the wall, her body taking on a defensive posture. A sound emerged from her throat, a series of musical clicks and tones that obviously constituted speech in her language. Cale raised his hands slowly, palms open. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, knowing she wouldn't understand the words but hoping his tone would convey his intentions. "You're safe here." She remained pressed against the wall, her eyes darting around the room, taking in her surroundings. Her skin had changed color slightly, taking on a reddish tinge that Cale suspected might indicate fear or stress. Slowly, Cale backed away, giving her space. He reached for a container of water he had prepared and held it out to her, then mimed drinking. She stared at the container suspiciously, then at him, then back at the container. After a long moment, she extended her hand, slowly, ready to snatch it back at the slightest threatening movement. Cale placed the water in her hand and stepped back again. She sniffed it, then tentatively touched it to her lips. Apparently finding it acceptable, she drank deeply, her eyes never leaving him. When she had finished, she set the container down and spoke again, another series of musical sounds. Then, seeming to realize the futility of verbal communication, she pointed to herself and made a sound that might have been her name, though Cale couldn't begin to reproduce it. Understanding the gesture, Cale pointed to himself. "Cale," he said clearly. She tilted her head, then attempted to repeat it. "KKL," she managed, the sound oddly musical in her voice. It was a start. Over the next few days, a tentative routine developed. Cale would bring food and water, which she accepted with increasing trust. He continued to treat her wounds, which were healing remarkably quickly. He showed her how to use the sanitation unit in his quarters when he wasn't present, respecting her privacy. Communication remained challenging, but was improving in small increments. Cale brought a basic translation interface from the station's library, intended for human languages, but adaptable enough that it might eventually make sense of her speech patterns. In the meantime, they relied on gestures and improvised signs. He learned that her skin color indeed reflected her emotional state. Pale blue for calm, violet for curiosity, red for alarm, and occasionally a soft gold that appeared when she seemed content or pleased. She examined everything in his quarters with intense curiosity. His tools, his few personal possessions, the fabricated window that displayed the starscape outside. She seemed particularly fascinated by a small plant he kept, one of the few living things on the station besides the humans. One evening, as Cale returned from his shift, he found her sitting cross-legged on the floor, staring at his terminal. She had somehow activated it and was rapidly scrolling through information, her eyes absorbing everything on the screen. Her skin glowed a bright violet, indicating deep concentration or excitement. "Hey," Cale said, startled. He wasn't sure if she should have access to station information, though he doubted she could understand much of it. She turned to him, unalarmed, and pointed to the screen, then to herself, then made a gesture he'd come to associate with questioning. "You want to know what this is?" Cale asked, approaching slowly. She nodded, a human gesture she had picked up from him. Cale sat beside her, careful to maintain some distance, and began explaining the basics of the terminal system, pointing to various elements on the screen. She watched intently, occasionally reaching out to touch the screen herself, seeming to intuit the interface's function quickly. After some time, she pointed to a section of text, and then to herself again, but with a different gesture, one he hadn't seen before. She repeated it several times, growing frustrated when he didn't understand. Finally, she stood up and went to the small plant he kept. She placed her hand near it, not touching, and closed her eyes. To Cale's astonishment, the plant seemed to respond, its leaves turning toward her hand as if seeking sunlight. A soft glow emanated from her palm, and the plant visibly straightened and greened before his eyes. She turned back to him and repeated the gesture she had made earlier, then pointed to the text on the screen. With a jolt, Cale realized she was trying to tell him that she understood something in the text, something about energy systems, which was what had been displayed. She was demonstrating that she had some ability to manipulate energy fields. You can affect energy? He asked, making a flowing motion with his hands. She nodded emphatically, her skin glowing a bright, pleased gold. It was an extraordinary revelation. Whatever species she belonged to, they had abilities that went beyond human capabilities, abilities that might be invaluable to the corporation if they discovered her. The thought made Kale uneasy. The corporation was not known for its ethical treatment of valuable resources, human or otherwise. His protective instinct, already awakened by her vulnerability, strengthened. He would need to be even more careful now. That night, as she slept on a makeshift bed he had arranged for her on the floor, she had insisted he keep his bed, using elaborate gestures to make her point. Kale lay awake, watching the gentle rise and fall of her chest, the soft glow of her skin in the darkened room. Who was she? Where had she come from? Why was she alone in that ship? Was she a refugee? An explorer? Someone in danger? The translation interface was making progress, albeit slowly. Perhaps soon he would have answers. But one thing was becoming clear to Kale. Whatever had brought this alien being to Xylos, he was glad she had found her way to him. His lonely existence had been irrevocably changed, and for the first time in years, he felt something like purpose. On the 7th day, Jarvik cornered Kale in the maintenance bay. "You've been scarce lately, old man," he said, his thin face set in its usual suspicious expression. Jarvik was in his 30s, ambitious, always looking for ways to advance his position within the corporation. "Working on something interesting." "Routine maintenance," Kale replied, not looking up from the component he was repairing. "Nothing that would interest you." "Yeah? Then why are you requisitioning extra rations? And why did the system log a thermal anomaly in your quarters last night?" Kale's hands stilled momentarily. The alien's body temperature ran higher than human normal, and occasionally spiked when she was particularly emotional or demonstrating her energy abilities. The station's environmental systems must have registered it. "I'm running some experiments with the heating system," he said smoothly. "The outer quarters get too cold during the night cycle. I've been meaning to address it for months." Jarvik's eyes narrowed. "Experiments. Right." He leaned in closer. "You know, the corporation pays good bonuses for reporting unusual findings, especially if they have potential value." The implied threat was clear. Jarvik suspected something and was letting Kale know he could be bought off, or would report his suspicions if there was profit in it. "I'll keep that in mind," Kale said coldly. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to finish this before the end shift." Jarvik lingered a moment longer, then sauntered away, a knowing smirk on his face. Kale cursed under his breath. He needed to be more careful, and he needed to prepare for the possibility that his secret wouldn't remain secret much longer. When he returned to his quarters that evening, he found the alien. She had started responding to Lyra, a name he had given her after she pointed to a star chart and indicated a region near the Lyra constellation, sitting at the terminal again. The translation interface was active, and she was rapidly entering data, her fingers moving with astonishing speed over the input panel. "Lyra," he said questioningly. She turned to him, her skin a mixture of violet excitement and something else, a deep blue he associated with concern or sadness. She gestured urgently for him to come look at the screen. What he saw made his blood run cold. The interface had finally made enough progress to translate basic concepts, and Lyra had apparently been trying to explain her situation. The screen displayed a crude but chilling message. "Danger. Hunters. Follow me. Kill all." "Hunters," Kale repeated, pointing to the word. "Someone is hunting you?" Lyra nodded vigorously, her skin now predominantly the deep blue of distress. She pointed to the star chart again, indicating a region of space, then made a sweeping motion with her hand, followed by a crushing gesture. "They destroyed something there? You're home," Kale guessed. Her eyes filled with what could only be tears, though they had an opalescent quality unlike human tears. She nodded again and typed more. "Kara. Bad. Kill all not Kara." "Kara," Kale repeated. "That's who's hunting you? They kill anyone who isn't Kara." Another nod. She typed again, slower now, seemingly frustrated by the limitations of the translation. "At last. All gone. Ship find me soon." A chill ran down Kale's spine. If he was understanding correctly, Lyra was the last of her kind, the survivor of some genocide perpetrated by these Kura, who were still hunting her and might soon track her to Xylos. "How soon?" he asked, pointing to that part of her message. She looked at the terminal's chronometer, then held up 7 fingers. 7 hours? Days? Kale asked. She pointed to the cycle indicator on the terminal, which showed the station's day rotation of 30 hours. 7 days, Kale confirmed. His mind raced. That wasn't much time to figure out what to do. If these hunters were as dangerous as Lyra suggested, they posed a threat not just to her, but potentially to the entire station. He should report this immediately. This was beyond first contact protocol. This was an imminent security threat. But as he looked at Lyra, her skin blue with sorrow and fear, he knew what would happen if he reported it. The corporation would either attempt to capture the approaching hostiles for study, regardless of the danger to the station personnel, or they would hand Lyra over to save themselves. Neither option was acceptable. "I'll protect you," he said firmly, looking directly into her color-shifting eyes. "We'll figure this out." He didn't know if she understood his words, but she seemed to understand his intent. Her skin shifted slightly, the blue receding as a touch of gold appeared around her hands where they rested on the terminal. Kale sat beside her and began making plans. They had 7 days to prepare for the arrival of the hunters, or to find a way for Lyra to escape them once again. The next day, an alert went out across the station. An unidentified vessel had been detected at the edge of the system, approaching Xylos. It would arrive in approximately 6 days. Kale knew immediately what it was. The Kara had found Lyra's trail faster than she had anticipated. The station was buzzing with speculation. A surprise corporate inspection? Pirates? Smugglers? In his quarters, Kale and Lyra worked feverishly. The translation interface had improved enough for basic communication, allowing Lyra to explain more about the Kara. They were a warrior species that considered themselves the only worthy form of intelligent life. They systematically hunted down and exterminated other species, particularly those with special abilities that they deemed threatening. Lyra's people, she called them the Illumi in her language, had possessed a deep connection to energy fields, able to sense, direct, and in some cases generate various forms of energy. This ability had made them particular targets for the Kara, who had destroyed their homeworld and hunted the survivors across multiple star systems. As far as Lyra knew, she was the last. She had been part of a small group of refugees when their ship was attacked. She alone had escaped in a small craft, injured and barely conscious, drifting until she crashed on Xylos. The Kara ship that was approaching was likely a scout vessel, sent to confirm her presence before the main fleet arrived. If it found evidence of her, it would signal others, and Xylos Station, perhaps the entire system, would be at risk. Kale had been covertly gathering supplies, medical kits, rations, portable power cells. He had also been making modifications to the station's security systems, creating backdoor access that would allow him to control various functions without alerting the rest of the crew. His plan was desperate but simple. When the Kara vessel arrived, he would help Lyra escape in one of the station's emergency shuttles, having programmed it to emit false signatures that would lead the Kara away from populated areas of the system. He would go with her. There would be no coming back for him after this level of protocol violation anyway. But on the 3rd day, his plans were shattered when Jarvik entered his work area with 2 security officers. "Maintenance Chief Kale," the senior officer said formally. "You are required to report to the station manager immediately regarding unauthorized access to station systems and suspected concealment of valuable corporation assets." Kale kept his expression neutral, though his mind was racing. "What is this about, Officer Diaz?" "Security Technician Jarvik has reported unusual activity in your quarters and suspicious modifications to station systems." Diaz's expression was professionally blank. "The station manager will discuss the details with you." Jarvik smirked behind the officers. "Just doing my duty to the corporation," he said smoothly. "I'm sure this is all a misunderstanding." Kale had no choice but to comply. As he was escorted to the station manager's office, he tried to think of a way to warn Lyra, to tell her to hide, to use the escape route he had shown her in case of emergency. But he had no opportunity. The meeting with the station manager was tense and accusatory. Cale denied everything, claiming that any modifications to station systems were part of his maintenance duties, any unusual readings in his quarters the result of equipment testing. "Then you won't mind if security conducts a thorough inspection of your quarters," the manager said, his gray eyes cold. "Not at all," Cale replied, maintaining his composure while inwardly panicking. "Though I would like to be present. That won't be necessary. Security is already conducting the inspection." Cale's heart sank. He could only hope that Lyra had sensed the danger and hidden herself. Meanwhile, in Cale's quarters, Lyra had indeed sensed the approach of strangers. Her ability to perceive energy fields alerted her to multiple human life signs moving with purpose toward the room. She quickly activated the terminal, scanned the security feeds Cale had given her access to, and saw him being escorted by security personnel. They had been discovered. Moving swiftly, she gathered the few essential items Cale had prepared for their escape and accessed the hidden panel he had shown her, an emergency access point to the maintenance tunnels that ran throughout the station. Just as the main door to the quarters began to open, she slipped into the narrow passage and pulled the panel closed behind her. From within the darkness of the tunnel, she could hear the security officers searching the room, their voices muffled but their confusion clear as they found evidence of her presence, but not her. Lyra moved through the tunnels as Cale had taught her, using the station schematic he had made her memorize. Her destination was their predetermined emergency meeting point, a rarely used storage bay near the shuttle docks. As she navigated the narrow passages, her mind filled with worry for Cale. Would they harm him? What would happen when the car arrived? She couldn't leave him behind, not after all he had done for her. Not after he had become the only being in the universe she trusted. Her people had a concept that didn't translate well into human languages, Kylar, a soul bond that transcended ordinary relationships. In a short time she had known Cale, something like that bond had begun to form. His kindness, his protection, his willingness to risk everything for a stranger from the stars. These things had touched her deeply. She would not abandon her Kylar. The Kara Scout vessel arrived at Xylos 2 days earlier than expected. It entered orbit without responding to communication attempts from the station. Its design was angular and predatory, bristling with what were obviously weapon systems. The station was put on high alert, all personnel ordered to emergency stations. Cale had been confined to quarters, different quarters under guard, pending a full investigation. He had maintained his story about equipment testing, but the evidence of another presence in his room was irrefutable. The only small mercy was that Lyra herself had not been found, suggesting she had escaped through the maintenance tunnel as they had planned. The station manager had just begun questioning Cale again when the alarm sounded. "Station breach. Unknown hostiles have boarded in Section 7. All personnel initiate lockdown protocols immediately." The Kara had come for Lyra. In the chaos that followed, Cale saw his opportunity. As his guard responded to the emergency, Cale disabled him with a quick, efficient strike, a skill from his earlier days in corporation security that he'd never thought he'd use again. He took the guard's weapon and access card and headed for the predetermined meeting point, hoping against hope that Lyra would be there. The station was in pandemonium. Reports flooded in of strange, armored figures moving through the corridors, disabling or killing anyone they encountered. They seemed to be searching methodically, heading toward the residential sections. Cale moved through service corridors and maintenance tunnels, avoiding the main passageways. Twice he had to hide from Kara search parties, humanoid figures in articulated armor that seemed partially biological, with insectoid features visible through transparent segments of their helmets. When he finally reached the storage bay, he found it empty. His heart sank. Had Lyra already been captured? Had she tried to escape without him? Then a soft glow emanated from behind a stack of cargo containers, and Lyra emerged from hiding. Her skin was a mixture of colors, the blue of worry, the gold of relief, and a new color, a deep rose he hadn't seen before. "Cale," she said, his name clear in her musical voice. She had been practicing human speech. Lyra, he replied, relief washing over him. We need to go. Now. The Kara. Here. She finished for him, her limited vocabulary supplemented by the translation device she carried. Hunt me. Kale nodded grimly. The emergency shuttle is 2 sections over. If we can reach it. An explosion rocked the station, throwing them both off balance. The lights flickered and emergency sirens began to wail. Station integrity compromised in Section 5, the automated system announced. Emergency bulkheads deploying. Section 5, directly between them and the shuttle bay. Alternative route, Lyra said, pointing to a schematic on her translation device. She had been studying the station's layout extensively. Kale nodded. It would take them through some of the more dangerous industrial areas of the station, but it might be their only chance. They moved swiftly, Kale leading with the guard's weapon ready, Lyra close behind. Her natural abilities gave her an advantage. She could sense energy signatures, including life forms, at a distance, providing early warning of approaching threats. They had almost reached the alternative route to the shuttle bay when Lyra suddenly froze, her skin paling to an almost white color that Kale had never seen before. She clutched his arm, her eyes wide with terror. Kara leader, she whispered. Close. Very strong. Before Kale could respond, a section of the corridor wall exploded inward. Through the breach stepped a figure larger than the others they had glimpsed, its armor more elaborate, adorned with what looked disturbingly like trophies from other species. Behind it came 4 more Kara. Warriors, their weapons trained on Kale and Lyra. The leader spoke, its voice a harsh, clicking sound that the translation device rendered in crude text. Last Illumi. Found. In hunt. Lyra stepped forward, positioning herself slightly in front of Kale. Her skin began to glow more intensely, shifting to a deep, pulsing purple he had never seen before. No hunt, she replied, her voice stronger than Kale had ever heard it. No more kill. The Kara leader made a sound that might have been laughter. All non-KHRA die. You last. Then done. It raised its weapon, a device that seemed to hum with building energy. What happened next occurred so quickly that Kale could barely process it. Lyra's body erupted with light, a corona of energy surrounding her. The air itself seemed to bend around her as she thrust her hands forward. A wave of pure force shot from her, striking the Kara leader and sending it crashing back through the breach it had created. The other warriors fired their weapons, but the energy bolts dissipated harmlessly against the field surrounding Lyra. With precise movements of her hands, Lyra redirected energy from the station's systems themselves, channeling it into devastating bursts that incapacitated the remaining Kara warriors. The display of power was breathtaking and terrifying, but was taking a visible toll on her. Her slender frame trembled with the effort, and Kale could see that maintaining such output was draining her rapidly. The Kara leader was recovering, rising from the rubble with a roar of rage. It charged forward, seemingly immune to the energy Lyra was projecting. Without hesitation, Kale stepped in front of Lyra, firing the guard's weapon repeatedly at the advancing Kara. The shots seemed to have minimal effect, but they slowed it momentarily, long enough for Lyra to gather her strength for one final, massive energy discharge. The blast caught the Kara leader full on, its armor cracking under the assault. It staggered, then collapsed, its exoskeleton smoking. Lyra sagged against Kale, nearly unconscious from the effort. He caught her, supporting her weight as he urged her toward the shuttle bay. They had to move quickly before more Kara arrived. They had just reached the emergency shuttle when a new alarm sounded. Through the viewports, they could see a larger vessel approaching, not Kara design, but corporation security. Attention Xylo Station, a voice announced over the emergency channel. This is Corporation Security Vessel Orion. We are responding to your distress call. Hostile vessel has been engaged and disabled. Prepare for boarding and evacuation. Kale hesitated. The immediate threat of the Kara might be neutralized, but what would happen when Corporation Security discovered Lyra? Would they protect her or exploit her? His indecision was interrupted by the arrival of armed security personnel, not station security, but corporation enforcers from the Orion. They surrounded Kale and Lyra, weapons raised. Maintenance Chief Kale, the lead officer, stated, his expression unreadable behind his tactical visor. You are in violation of multiple corporation protocols regarding unauthorized alien contact and concealment of valuable assets. The entity with you is to be taken into corporation custody immediately. Kale tightened his hold on the still weakened Lyra. She's not an asset, he said firmly. She's a refugee, the last of her kind, being hunted by the hostiles that just attacked this station. That is for corporation scientists and executives to determine, the officer replied. Hand over the alien now, or face immediate termination. Kale raised his weapon. I can't do that. The standoff might have ended badly if not for the unexpected arrival of a figure in the distinctive uniform of a corporation executive. The security personnel immediately snapped to attention. Stand down, the newcomer ordered. She was a tall woman with silver-streaked dark hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to absolute authority. I'm Supervisor Rain, Special Projects Division. This situation falls under my jurisdiction. She approached Kale and Lyra, studying them with shrewd eyes. You are the technician who found and sheltered this being? She asked Kale. I am, he replied warily. And you, she said, addressing Lyra directly, are responsible for neutralizing the Kara forces? Lyra, still leaning heavily on Kale, nodded weakly. Impressive, Rain said. She considered them both for a long moment, then seemed to come to a decision. The Kara are a known hostile species that have destroyed multiple outposts on the rim of corporation space. Until now, we've had little defense against their technology. Your friend may have just provided us with valuable insights. She turned to the security personnel. These two are now classified under Special Projects Protocol 7. They are to be given medical attention, then returned to designated quarters for debriefing. No invasive procedures, no separation. The lead officer seemed about to protest, but Rain cut him off with a sharp gesture. This comes directly from Central, officer. The corporation recognizes value when it sees it, and sometimes that value is best preserved intact. In the days that followed, Kale and Lyra found themselves in an uncertain but far better position than they had feared. They were confined to a specially prepared suite of rooms on the corporation security vessel, as Xylo Station was evacuated and secured following the Kara attack. Supervisor Rain proved to be pragmatic rather than cruel. She recognized that Lyra's abilities and knowledge of the Kara were far more valuable if offered willingly rather than extracted forcibly. And she quickly assessed that Lyra's cooperation was inextricably linked to Kale's well-being. A bargain was struck. Lyra would provide information about the Kara and limited demonstrations of her energy manipulation abilities. In exchange, she would remain under Kale's guardianship, and both would be granted special status within the corporation, protected and provided for, but with certain restrictions on their movements and communications. Jarvik, it was revealed, had been severely injured during the Kara attack. When he recovered, he would be transferred to a remote outpost even further from civilization than Xylos, a fitting consequence for his actions, in Kale's opinion. The corporation, meanwhile, was left to deal with the implications of confirmed hostile alien contact and the existence of previously unknown intelligent species. The Kara Scout vessel had been neutralized, but both Lyra and the corporation knew this was merely a temporary respite. The Kara would eventually note their scout's disappearance and send others. 2 weeks after the attack, Kale and Lyra were returned to Xylo Station, which was being repaired and fortified. Most of the regular personnel had been reassigned, replaced by a smaller team of specialists and security personnel aware of the station's new classified status. Kale had been promoted to Station Operations Chief, giving him authority over the day-to-day functioning of Xylos. Lyra had been officially designated as a special consultant on non-terrestrial energy systems, a title that amused Kale but gave her legitimate status within the corporation hierarchy. Their living quarters had been expanded and improved, now officially shared rather than Lyra being Kale's secret guest. The station itself was being modified with enhanced defensive systems, some based on insights Lyra had provided about car technology. It wasn't freedom, exactly, but it was security, and given the alternatives, Kale considered it a victory. Lyra's command of human language had improved dramatically with proper instruction and translation tools. She still spoke with a musical accent, certain sounds difficult for her vocal structure, but she could communicate clearly on most topics. She had also begun teaching Kale about her people, their culture, their history, their understanding of energy fields that humans had barely begun to comprehend. In turn, he taught her more about humanity, with all its flaws and virtues. One evening, as they shared a meal in their quarters, Kale noticed that Lyra was unusually quiet, her skin shifting between the deep rose color he had come to associate with strong emotion and a gentle gold of contentment. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. Lyra looked up at him, her color-shifting eyes settling into a warm amber. "I am thinking about words," she said carefully, "about what things are called in different languages." Kale smiled. "Your English is getting very good." "Thank you," she replied, then hesitated before continuing. "Kale, in my language, there's a word. Kylar. It is difficult to translate exactly." "What does it mean?" he asked, curious about this aspect of her culture she hadn't shared before. "It means—" She searched for the right words. "One who shields you when you have nothing. One who would die to protect you. One whose soul resonates with yours across the void." She paused. "One who is chosen and who chooses in return." Kale felt a warmth spreading through him at her words. "That's beautiful," he said softly. "We have many words for different kinds of bonds, but nothing quite that complete." Lyra nodded, then reached across the table to take his hand, a human gesture she had adopted. "I have been learning human words for relationships. Friend, ally, partner." Her skin deepened to that rose color again. "There's one word I have heard. Husband, it seems. Closest to Kylar." Kale's breath caught. He understood what she was saying, what she was offering. In the months they had known each other, facing death together, protecting each other, learning and growing together, something profound had developed between them, something that transcended the differences in their species, their origins, their very nature. "Kale," Lyra said, her voice soft but certain. "You are my Kylar, my husband." He squeezed her hand gently, feeling the warm glow of her skin against his. "And you are everything to me, Lyra." That night, they stood together at the viewport in their quarters, looking out at the stars. The same stars that had once seemed cold and distant to Kale now represented possibility, connection, a future he had never imagined. Xylo's station, once merely a remote outpost where he had hidden from life, had become something else entirely, a home in the truest sense of the word. Not because of the physical structure, but because of the bond formed within it. Lyra leaned against him, her skin glowing softly in the dimmed light of their quarters, illuminating them both in a gentle radiance. Her hand found his, fingers intertwining in a physical manifestation of the deeper connection they shared. They stood in comfortable silence, two beings from different worlds who had found in each other something rare and precious, understanding, acceptance, and love that bridged the vast gulfs between stars. The universe remained dangerous, the Kara still a threat, the future uncertain. But whatever came, they would face it together, the human and the alien who called him husband.